indicates what a $2.15 million override would do. Now, $2.15 million override for fiscal year '08 would actually leave in fiscal year '08 an excess of roughly $750,000 in money. It is proposed by the Budget Strategy Committee that that money be transferred into the Operation Stabilization Fund, our savings account, and used for payment of bills for 2009. Now, using that $750,000 towards our deficit of 2009 brings us into a situation where we would have an actual carryover of roughly $490,000 that could be carried over into 2010. 2010 would then be projected to leave us with a deficit of roughly $600,000. Now, I said earlier that our $2.15 million would get us through 2010 without a deficit. The reason I said that is because the number that we're using for free cash for 2009 and 2010 in these projections is $500,000. We're using a conservative figure based on our finance director's opinion as to the fact that he cannot guarantee $1 million plus like we have had in the last 2 or 3 years over the next 2 to 3 years, because certain things are changing out there in government. One of the things that are changing is state funding of the town of Longmeadow, and believe it or not, excise taxes have a big portion in the town of Longmeadow's other income. People buying new cars, and this may seem symptomatic, but the days of 0% financing have passed. People are not running out and buying new cars like they were 3 years ago. Our actual income coming in from excise taxes is decreasing. So our finance director has reduced his projections with reference to free cash from $1 million down to $500,000. What the Budget Strategies Committee is banking on is that the actual number will hopefully fall between the $500,000 that is put into the calculations and $1 million plus that we have been generating for the last 2 to 3 years. We're hoping for $750,000, $800,000, maybe even $1 million in free cash if we're lucky. If you put the extra money into the carryover figures, you now wipe out the deficit for 2010. $600,000 more in free cash either in '09 or 2010 comes out to be a balanced budget for 2010. We could sit here and tell you that we wanted $2.65 million so that we could wipe out the deficit in 2010, but we try to stay as low as possible and give us some hopes that we could still get through 2010 without need for cuts and level funding. The next slide, I think you actually have handouts of this slide because it's relatively small, is what we worked with on the Budget Strategies Committee for a Excel spreadsheet of what our revenues and expenses would look like through 2011, but the only thing that we looked at was through 2010. And as you can see on the bottom of each line, for fiscal year 2008, we are projecting a deficit of $1.378 million. And I want to call your attention to the second to last line under category sources. So the top half of the page, right above the bold 52,308,000, there's a figure there that's on the line called other, in parentheses, including free cash. We are utilizing every single dollar of free cash that we expect to have in 2008. That $1.7 million is in there as revenue. Using all of our free cash without an override, we are still projecting a roughly $1.4 million deficit for 2008. That's the year that we are currently in. We don't deal with calendar years in town government, we deal with fiscal year. We're currently in fiscal year 2008. So by June 30th, of 2008, we expect to be $1.4 million in the hole without an override. Carrying that number forward into 2009, we anticipate being roughly $2.5 million in the hole at the end of fiscal year 2009, and at the end of fiscal year 2010, we anticipate being $3.3 million in the hole for each one of those fiscal years. Now, those are some significant numbers in terms of making this government work without an override. Those numbers are significant because they are going to have drastic effects if we have to cut that much money out of the budget. It's going to be seen. It's not going to be as pretty as saying we're going to pick up a barrel of trash or limit you to a barrel of trash. You're going to see substantial reductions, presumably in the amounts of pupils to teachers. And you're going to see substantial reductions across the whole slew of services in the town of Longmeadow because those numbers are relatively big. The final slide and handout that we gave to you is the actual projections through 2010 with the override. And it correlates in line with the earlier slide showing that by 2010, if free cash were only $500,000, I'm sorry, I got the wrong one. If it was only $500,000, and at the end of 2000, well, at the actual, what this particular chart doesn't do is it doesn't carry over the money each year. So the $750,000 has to be carried over against a deficit of $280,000, leaving a surplus of roughly $500,000 that gets carried over into 2010, leaving a deficit of $500,000 as the earlier slide had indicated. And again, it was our hopes that we would have greater free cash than the $500,000 so that by 2010, we actually walk out without cuts in services and the ability to pay our bills without any additional tax increases.